Hey YouTube, how's it going? It's Adam here with Retro Repairs, and today I got another repair video for you. So this will be part 2 of my Sega CD Model 1 series. Just a quick recap for you. In part 1, what I did was show you how to actually set this thing up, how to test it, how to open it, and how to replace the drive belt, which is a common point of failure on these things. Another common point of failure on pretty much any type of disk drive system made in this type of era is replacing the save batteries. So that's what this is going to be all about. So very quick how to open it. I've already removed the screws, but there are 2 screws right here you need to take out. You flip it over, and there should be 6 screws on the back you need to remove. So 8 in total, and that will open up the casing here. So we're going to pop this open. And this is what we've got underneath. So there are 2 RF shielding parts here. The first one is going to be this big piece which you remove, and that hides the disk drive. Second piece is going to be this one right here. So we can lift it up and start removing these connectors. There are 2 screws I actually do need to remove, and that is these 2 which are holding on this expansion port connector. So there's one. And there's 2. So put those off to the side, and then we can start thinking about getting this all taken apart here. So this is what we're going to be focusing on right here. So we can put actually the rest of that away, and we will zoom in a bit right here on this drive, or this board. So right in the corner here is this battery, which we're going to want to look at. And this is the battery that handles the save functionality. So what happens is the save games are stored in this little chip right here, and the battery powers or sends a constant signal to that chip. So just a very small amount of power, but it is required in order for saving functionality to actually work. So what we need to do is remove this and install a new one. As of right now, I'm not actually having any problems with the save functionality. However, that very easily could change at any point. This system's 25 plus years old. So this really, it's probably past its due date here. So what we're going to want to do to start doing this is you're going to need a soldering iron, you're going to need your solder, and you're going to need a soldering braid and some flux. So I've got all that right here, ready to go. So let's get started. So we'll flip this thing over. What I like to do when I desolder anything is, firstly, we'll add some flux to it. Flux helps to really clean up those metal contact surfaces. Helps to make sure it's clean, to make sure that it will solder flows the way you're going to want it to. So now, grab my soldering iron. It's always a good idea, clean your tip off before and after each use. So I'm going to do that right now. Add some solder to the tip, just like that. Wipe it up a bit and do it one more time. That's called tinning. Next step is I like to make a quick contact with all of the points I'm about to desolder, and sometimes add a little bit more solder. Helps to add a little bit of new solder to whatever you're desoldering, if that makes sense. Mainly because it will help encourage the solder to flow nicely. Sometimes you get old solder that's starting to oxidize and it just doesn't really cooperate very well. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more. That's about it here. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do here. So we grab our soldering braid, and all I'm really going to do, hold it up against these solder points and heat it up. And the solder should just wick right into that braid. So you do want to be careful. You see these capacitors that are near my braid here? You do not want to get those caught on there and rip something off the board. Otherwise, you are going to have issues when you try and restart this thing. Okay, so clean that tip, tin it again. And now what I like to do here is grab something like either a blade or a screwdriver and just very lightly move these pins a little bit, and that helps to free it from the board. Sometimes if there's a very small amount of residual solder left, it will help to break that loose. And then we should be able to just lift it straight up. And if you're having too hard of a time, it's a good idea to just stop and go desolder. So I think this one is still stuck a little bit. So if I focus in on this point right here, you see around here there's a nice hole. I'm seeing a little bit of solder still in there. So we'll grab another chunk of braid and cut off the used stuff and just desolder that a bit better. So, as I mentioned earlier, I like to add flux and new solder when I'm desoldering, so I think I'm going to add a bit more to this. And then grab my braid and try and desolder that. There we go. So now when we take a look, I can see a nice hole forming around that. I should be able to move that. Perfect. And that should lift up pretty nicely. I just need something to get under it. There we go. And this last one, it's nice when you're down to just one, because what you can do is, if that is not nicely lifting up, you just heat it up and pull it out. There we go. So that's been removed. So the original batteries, what they have is 3 little tabs on them. I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to show you quickly. But first, what I just like to do out of general curiosity is test this battery. So the battery is fairly old, so I'm going to use a multimeter. I just want to see what type of voltage I'm getting off of this. So let's see if I can get this in a way that you can see. So new batteries should give off 3 volts, and this one is about 2 volts. So it's definitely on its way out. So it's a good thing we took care of this now before that becomes an issue later. So now the next important step is cleaning these pads. So grab your soldering iron again and your solder wick, and just try and clean off the top of these pads really as best as you can. All right, perfect. So before we go to actually install the new battery, you want to clean this first. So what I use is just some simple rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip, and give it a good scrub here. You want to get any flux residue off. Flux is corrosive, so it will eat away at the components and the metals on here. There we go. That's nice. Take a look at the other side. It should be still good, and I would say it is. You should be able to see through these holes, so if I cover the back side with my finger like that, you should be able to see that, and up here. Perfect. So what I've gotten here is a replacement battery, but it's slightly different. So as I mentioned, there is no tabs like this one has. The type of battery is an ML 2016, so it's important you use the ML variation. They also make a similar one called a CR16. ML16s are rechargeable, while the CR16s are not. So important that you are using the right type. If you try and use a non-rechargeable battery on a circuit that tries to charge a battery, you could run into problems. So I'm going to use this battery holder. And what this does is makes it really easy in the future should I want to actually replace this. So first thing I want to do is line this up and see what kind of space limitations I'm working with. So height shouldn't be an issue here, nope. But it's possible that this battery holder might extend a bit further over than I really have room to work with. So I want to try and keep it on this side of the board where possible. So the holder's in place where I need it to be, but it's just a little bit too large. So as you can see, I can't quite fit this down all the way, and if I do, it's going to spread out further than it needs to. So I'm just going to have to trim this shielding a bit before I put it back together. But this will work for our purposes. So let's flip it over. And same thing again. So apply some flux. Oh, I lost the pin, and there it is. Apply some flux. You'll note that there's only 2 pins on this battery rather than 3 that came with the Sega or the original battery. That's completely fine. These 2 down here are linked together anyways, so any signal that comes through this pin will wind up in this pin and vice versa. So that's not an issue to really worry about. So let's flip that over. We've got it all fluxed up. Grab the soldering iron, tin the tip a bit, heat it up, and apply some solder. Okay, that should work. So once again, Q-tip, alcohol, clean up the remaining flux that was left over. Not a bad idea. Once you're done this, grab some side cutters and just snip off anything that's kind of a little too big. You don't want it touching the shielding on the bottom. You should normally be okay, but not a bad habit to get into. And then just install the battery. So one thing I should have done was check the polarity on each side. So grabbing my old battery, the pins with the two on this side is positive, so that means that positive needs to be up. So it's always a good idea just to double check that you're installing your battery the proper way. But now the battery is installed. If I wanted to remove it in the future, it's as simple as just popping the battery out like this. Without now needing to solder anything. And replacing it with a new one. So that should be good. So now let's line up the shielding. And as I mentioned before, it's a little too big right in this corner. So I'm going to actually just take some side cutters, and right here I'm going to trim it back. You want to make sure that this is not contacting the actual battery itself. So it shouldn't require much trimming. Let's zoom out a bit here. Just the tricky part is actually getting in there with the side cutters. When using side cutters, it's a good idea to just be careful because these shards are sharp. You don't want to grab something thinking that it's clean and get pricked. Let's just kind of bend that back. And we'll double check to make sure that we have the clearance we need. So almost, but not quite. It's actually catching on this little bent in bit, so I could probably just bend that outwards. And there we go. That is now sitting nicely. Actually, the shielding is very close to this battery here, and I'm not comfortable with that. So I'm going to trim that back a little bit more. Okay, so I think this should do the trick. Let's put it into place here. And yeah, we got lots of space there now. So as I was mentioning before, these shards are can be very sharp. This is just an example of what I'm talking about. That could easily poke into you and not feel very nice. So let's begin reassembly. Alright, so reassembly, for the most part, you're just going to do the opposite of what you did to disassemble it. So you're going to start with, I find it's easiest to start with this side connector here. So push that in and get this just sitting nicely. Put this connector here in the bottom. Give that a good push on all sides. It should be sitting pretty flush. Sometimes you can just slide this on the side, which looks like it's cooperating today. Just like that. And then begin screwing it back together. So, as I mentioned in the first video, the two screws that hold this extension connector in place have coarser threads than any of the other screws. So, we're going to put those in. And then once they're in, we're going to give this a general test. So the goal of this test right now is just to make sure that everything powers on properly. We have everything connected right. We didn't cause any further board problems. So let's get it hooked up. Just gonna put this cover in place right now, but it's not going to be permanent. So I'm not screwing it together yet until I'm comfortable knowing that the repair took and is working properly. So let's go to the TV. Okay, so we're ready to give this a test, and my repair assistant is going to help us out with this. So let's turn it on. So we're getting the boot up music. Press reset to open tray. Press start to close the tray. And we just want to make sure that this is booting into a game here. I know that the save functionality worked before, so I'm not going to go too far into it, but as long as the battery's in there, it will continue to work. There we go, we're booting into Sega CD, or Sonic CD, sorry. So that's actually just how you repair or replace a save battery on a Model 1 Sega CD. So like I said, there's not a whole lot to it. You don't even really have to tear the whole system apart. You just need to get that one board out. So reasonably easy repair, and if you have a soldering iron and you're comfortable soldering something like that, then really not too much to it at all. So thanks a lot for watching. I hope that the video was informative and helpful to some of you. And let me know what you thought in the comments. If you let me know what you want to see for future videos as well. If you have an idea, I'll see what I can do to try and get that, make that become a reality. So Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let me know what you think. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for part 3, hopefully the conclusion of this.